Hey everyone, today we are going to be talking about what it means to be a virtuous woman. So, we are going to be reading chapter 31 in the book of Proverbs, verses 10 through 31. Now, if you are a man watching this, you can keep watching because a lot of these verses can apply to a man as well and how you can be a virtuous man. It's also going to be what you want to pray for in a woman. Okay? So, before we get started on reading the verses and then going back on each verse and discussing, let's talk a little bit about what the book of Proverbs is. So, it is a book that is full of wisdom, how to live your life, how to conduct your lives, instructions. And it's mainly written by King Solomon, but there are passages written by Agur and King Lemuel. And something I found out that was really interesting was if we look at chapter 31, verses 10 through 31, it's like it's listed in ABC order, like acrostic poem. So if we had written it in English, it would be each verse begins with A, the second verse begins with B, third verse begins with C. So it's like an ABC order, but Hebrew ABC. So there's 22 verses, each verse beginning with the successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Now, I may be saying these Hebrew letters wrong, but you'll get the idea. And hopefully this is not backwards on the screen. So Proverbs 31 and 10 begins with the Hebrew letter Aleph, 31:11 Bet, 31:12 begins with Gimel, all the way down to the last verse and using the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Tav. So I thought that was really interesting. And they did this that way it would be more poetic and it would be an easier way to remember what was written down. And there's other verses and passages in the Bible that uses that same like acrostic writing. So, if we go to Proverbs 31 and 1, the words of King Lemuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him. So, King Lemuel isn't mentioned in any recordings as like a king of Judah or Israel, so he was probably a pagan king. Now, his name means belonging to God. So some believe that this is Solomon that is using like a fake name and he is sharing his wisdom that his mother Bathsheba taught him, but there's no proof of that. So either way, we have a king that is sharing lessons that his mother taught him, including the qualities that a virtuous woman shall have. So I just assumed that it was a man telling us what he wanted in a woman, but I really like the fact that this is a lesson being passed on. It's a man sharing the wisdom that his mother taught him about a virtuous woman. So I just really love that. Okay, now let's go and read chapter 31, verses 10 through 31 in the book of Proverbs. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands. She is like the merchant ships. She bringeth her food from afar. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. She considereth a field, and buyeth it. With the fruit of her hands she planteth a vineyard. She girdeth her loins with strength, and strengtheneth her arms. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. She stretcheth out her hand to the poor, yea, she reacheth forth her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry, her clothing is silk and purple. Her husband is known in the gates, when he sitteth among the elders of the land. She maketh fine linen, and selleth it, and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. Her children arise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praiseth her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Okay, so let's go back to 31 and 10. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. So virtuous means having or showing high moral standards. And if we look at the section that says for her price is far above rubies, let's go to Proverbs 3 and 15, and this is describing wisdom. She is more precious than rubies, and all the things that thou canst desire are not to be compared unto her. So I like that a virtuous woman is also compared to rubies, like wisdom was compared to far above rubies. Now, far above rubies, a price far above rubies. Rubies are rare and valuable, and rubies also represent beauty and wisdom. Now, if we look at Proverbs 12 and 4, it says, a virtuous woman is a crown to her husband, but she that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones. So we see the contrast of what a virtuous woman is and one who is not a virtuous woman. Moving on to verse 11. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. So the husband of a virtuous woman can trust her. He will lack nothing of value. A foolish woman that couldn't be trusted would take away from the home. So financially, emotionally, materialistically. But a virtuous woman, he can trust her with the runnings of the household. He's not going to lack anything of value. Verse 12. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. I really love that. Most people probably focus on she will do him good and not evil. And that's great. But I love that it says all the days of her life. So not just a few months, a few weeks, a few years, not when the honeymoon phase is over. All the days of her life, she is going to do her husband good. She is committed. A virtuous woman is committed. Verse 13, she seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands. So she works to find the things that her household needs. So wool is used for clothing. Flax is used for a lot of things, but it's a plant that's used to make linen. So she has to work with her hands. She spins the wool, and she does this willingly. So she wants to. It's not begrudgingly or unhappily. And I can say honestly that sometimes I work, but I'm not happy about it, and I'm, doing it begrudgingly, like I don't want to do this work. But a virtuous woman does the work, and she does it willingly. So verse 14 says, she is like the merchant ships. She bringeth her food from afar. So a merchant ship, you can just imagine it's that continual supply. She will go far and wide to bring the best to her family. She's not just going to take what's available right there. She's like a merchant ship. She's going out far and wide, bringing in the best to her family. Verse 15, she riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. So she gets up early in the morning while it's still dark out, while it's still night, to get food prepared for her house, and even showing kindness to her servants and her maidens, and preparing food for them as well. Verse 16, she considereth the field and buyeth it. With the fruit of her hands she planteth a vineyard. She thinks about buying a field and plants a vineyard. So she is making wise decisions, wise choices. She's not just spontaneously venturing into something. The NLT version says, with her earnings she plants a vineyard. So she's using what she has earned to buy more things that will profit her family. And that is important for us as Christians, because we need to use what God has given us, and not to have more things materially, but we have to use what God has given us to provide even more for our family, the things that we need. So we, when we're trusted with a little, we can be trusted with much. And if you look to Isaiah 5 and 2, this describes the work of a vineyard. So she is considering buying a vineyard, but there's a lot of work that goes into that. It's not something to be taken lightly. So Isaiah 5 and 2. And he fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof, and planted it with the choicest vine, and built a tower in the midst of it, and also made a winepress therein. And he looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. Okay, so verse 17. She girdeth her loins with strength, and strengtheneth her arms. So the definition of gird is to prepare oneself for something difficult, or to encircle the body with a belt or a band. 1 Kings 18 and 46 says, and the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he girded up his loins and ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. Men at this time wore long tunics, which wouldn't allow them to fight or run, so they would have to gird up their loins tying up the extra material. So they would tuck up the extra material into that girdle, into that belt. When they did this, they were preparing for battle or hard work. So women in this culture at this time in the Bible would not gather up their garments like that because their legs would be exposed. But this is a metaphor saying she girdeth up her loins with strength. She is prepared, she is strong, and she is ready to work. Verse 19 says, she layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. Okay, so we've actually skipped verse 18, sorry. Let's go back to verse 18. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good, and her candle goeth not out by night. So she works late into the night, making sure her business is good. Verse 19. A distaff is a stick or a spindle onto which wool or flax is wound for spinning. So again, we're talking about, she's working, she's using her hands willingly to work. She is continually working to provide for her household. Verse 20, she stretcheth out her hand to the poor, yea, she reacheth forth her hands to the needy. So she works hard for not only her family, but reaches out to those in need. And many times in the Bible, it talks about giving to those who need help or those who are poor. So Proverbs 19 and 17 says, he that hath pity upon the poor lendeth unto the Lord, and that which he hath given will he pay him again. And if we look at Matthew 25, verses 35 through 40. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, and fed thee, or thirsty, and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. So the Bible tells us many times about, that's not just for a virtuous woman. We're all called to help the poor and the needy. Verse 21, she is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. The NLT version says she has no fear of winter, for everyone has warm clothes. Now, scarlet is, that Hebrew word for scarlet could signify not only scarlet, like the color being double dyed, but it's also double garments. So it's just heavy garments. Her household is warm in the winter time. Verse 22, she maketh herself coverings of tapestry, her clothing is silk and purple. So she makes her own linens for the beds. Her clothing is silk and purple. Now purple, to get this color at this time, it was very costly. The dye that comes from the seashell that they used to make this color is off of the Phoenician coast. Now purple was always usually associated with royalty. So if we look at Luke 16 and 19, it says, there was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen. And Mark 15 and 17, speaking about Jesus, says, and they clothed him with purple and plaited a crown of thorns and put it about his head. So verse 23 says, her husband is known in the gates when he sitteth among the elders of the land. Her husband is esteemed and honored among the elders, and that's in part because of his virtuous wife. And if we remember about our discussion on the book of Ruth, I think it's chapter 4, when Boaz is at the gates. Boaz told Ruth she was a virtuous woman, and, he ended up being her husband, and he was well known in the gates. So I just like how that all ties in together to this discussion on a virtuous woman. Verse 24, she maketh fine linen and selleth it, and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. So she works to provide. And sometimes I know that there's just a discussion on if women should work or not. But, when we look at this, the virtuous woman was working a lot, wasn't she? So, verse 25, strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. Now, the more well-known version of that scripture says she is clothed with strength and dignity, and she laughs without fear of the future. So she wears strength and honor. It covers her. She wears that, and she has no fear of the future. So whenever we trust in God, we don't have fear of the future, or we shouldn't, because, our future is in God's hands. So, verse 26, she openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. What she says is full of kindness and wisdom. And if we look at Proverbs 21:19, it says, "It is better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and an angry woman." Proverbs 25:24 says, "It is better to dwell in the corner of a housetop than with a brawling woman in a wide house." So brawling means quarrelsome. So again, we have that contrast of a virtuous woman. What she says is full of kindness and wisdom, and maybe a not so virtuous woman. We see that, a woman that is angry, contentious, quarrelsome, it's not looked as a good thing when you possess those qualities. And the Bible says it's better to dwell in the wilderness or like in the corner of a house than to deal with that. Verse 27, she looketh well to the ways of her household and eateth not the bread of idleness. So she watches her household carefully. She avoids idleness and laziness. Ecclesiastes 10:18 says, laziness leads to a sagging roof. Idleness leads to a leaky house. So she's not lazy. She's not idle. She keeps her house, she watches over them continually. Verses 28 and 29. Her children arise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praiseth her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. So her children and her husband are praising her, and they're saying there are many women who have done virtuously, but you surpass them all. You're better than all of them. If we look at verse 30, favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. So favor is charm. Now, false charm is deceptive, and we know that outward beauty doesn't last. But what is truly, truly beautiful is a woman who trusts in the Lord. And it's just not, someone may have some outward beauty, and you may see that they're beautiful for a while, if they're putting off this false charm and, kind of vain. We may see that as beautiful for a while, but that is not an everlasting beauty. That is not something that's going to stick forever. Our outward beauty is going to fade, but someone who truly loves the Lord, you just see this glow about them. They're beautiful. And verse 31, give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. So reward her for all she has done. The work she does speaks for itself. Now, these are things that we can pray to be as a woman, and it is not meant to be a list that says you must be perfect, okay? Because we are none perfect. This isn't something to say I'm never going to be able to be that Proverbs 31 woman. We can't do it aside from the Lord, but as we grow closer to the Lord, He's going to keep doing a work in us, and it will be evident in how we conduct ourselves and how we treat our household. It will be evident that the Lord is within us. Now, this can be for women who are unmarried or without children. We can be a virtuous woman without being a wife or a mother. So if you're in that place in your life where you're not married or you don't have children, you can still be a Proverbs 31 woman or a virtuous woman and shine your light. You can be that woman that people can look at you and see Jesus. So let's all pray and seek the Lord more and let that beauty shine from within. I love you, and God loves you.